But we start tonight with the unprecedented influence that billionaires, that's with a B, now exercise in American politics. Currently, Donald Trump is building the wealthiest cabinet in history, raising new concerns about whether they're going to work for the American people or for their own bottom lines. And now new reporting on the money that Elon Musk, the world's richest man, spent in order to get Trump elected. The New York Times reporting that Musk spent roughly $250 million in just the final months of the race, which mainly went to his super PAC and other various funds, including his $1 million lottery scheme. Like any good businessman, Musk probably expected a decent return on his investment, and he's definitely getting it. Musk's stake in SpaceX has grown by $60 billion in value since the election. It's now the most valuable defense contractor in the country. Musk was given a role outside, and I'll put that in quotes, of the government with this so-called Doge or Doge panel. But inside the government, Trump is looking to add at least 10 billionaires to his administration. If you combine the net worth of all of Trump's picks, including Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, they would be worth more than the GDP of hundreds of countries, including Finland, New Zealand, and Chile. And with all of this newfound power, Republicans and the ultra-wealthy are now looking at cutting the social safety net, which at least 70 million Americans rely on in some form.
Nothing is sacrosanct. Nothing. They're going to put everything on the table.
That's what they told lawmakers. Everything is on the table, and that includes Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
We're going to have some hard decisions. We got to bring the Democrats in and talk about Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. There's hundreds of billions of dollars to be saved, and we know how to do it. We just have to have the stomach to actually take those challenges on.
John Thune, who is the Senate incoming Republican leader, who also met with Elon Musk this morning, told me that perhaps mandatory programs are areas that they're looking to make cuts in, like Social Security.
I can promise you that come 2025, spending reform will be a top priority for our new Republican majority. And they're not going to be easy conversations, but they're essential for our long-term survival.
Trump won the election in part by pitching himself as a populist, a champion, if you will, for the working class. But now he and his billionaire buddies are looking to cut taxes for themselves and to slash the safety net for everyone else. Looks like bucks for me, but not for thee. Joining me now is Molly Jong-Fast, special correspondent for Vanity Fair, and Teddy Schleifer from the New York Times. He co-wrote the piece in the Times on Elon's spending. My thanks to both of you for getting us started. Molly, look, we're going to have billionaires running the government while Republicans look to slash the social safety net. This ain't any kind of populism I've ever read about.
No, and I think we all sort of saw this coming, right? We saw Project 2025. The plans in there are trying to not fund the federal government. And if you look at the appointment of Ross Vaught in the OMB, like there's clearly a lot of plans here to cut the federal government off at the knees. But remember, Trump was elected because he said that he was going to make things less expensive.
Teddy, you know Elon Musk, but you also know the billionaire class pretty well. Have you ever seen spending at this magnitude from one person in an election cycle?
I mean, look, not the first time that someone's going to put a lot of zeros at the end of a check here. I think what was striking about Musk's involvement this cycle was just how kind of hot and fast this came. This is not somebody who has donated a lot of money to Republican politics in the past. Like, you know, another big donor this cycle has been Miriam Adelson. We're not talking about her because Miriam Adelson and her late husband donated hundreds of millions of dollars to Republican politicians all the time. I think what was new was you had somebody who at the beginning of this year, based on our reporting, was very lukewarm about Donald Trump, who was, didn't like Joe Biden, to be sure, but suddenly, putting in $270 million is what the final bill ended up being for Musk. That money came really late, really fast, and now, he's basically kind of helping oversee this presidential transition in a way that you would think that Elon and Donald Trump have been best friends for years. Really, they just got to know each other this year.
So, Teddy, what's the larger impact, though, of billionaires collectively having this much of an impact on democracy and the outcome of elections?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think the outcome is what we're seeing happen right now. Right now, at the Trump transition headquarters over the last couple of weeks, it hasn't just been Elon Musk who's been playing this big role in the transition, steering, picking other billionaires at times for those gigs. All of Musk's friends are very involved in this transition. The payoff, so to speak, is the access, the influence. I don't believe that Elon Musk got involved in this presidential election because of that. When you talk to Elon and his friends, he genuinely believes that American democracy was at stake. He's obviously very concerned about immigration, about crime. But it is also true that the payoff is extraordinary. And Musk, you point out his net worth going way up. The reason why it's going way up is because people think that Tesla and SpaceX and xAI, his artificial intelligence company, are going to be heavily advantaged by their relationship to Trump, and they probably will be.
Yeah, but Molly, isn't that just the glaring problem here when it comes to the prospective conflicts of interest? Not only is it the idea that these wealthy people in service in the American government would have to divest themselves, and maybe put some of their interests, their financial interests in blind trust. But to Teddy's point, I mean, Musk bought access. I mean, he may have had to write a big check for it, but he bought access, and it's going to benefit his bottom line, and it's not going to benefit the bottom line of the American citizens. The median net worth of an American family is $192,900, according to the Federal Reserve back in 2023. That's definitely not billionaire status.
Yeah, no, I mean, the whole thing is not how any of this is supposed to work. And the reason that we have these ethics laws are because the idea is that when you are a public servant, you serve the public and not yourself. And we see here Donald Trump or at least the theory that a lot of people have is that Donald Trump will stick his finger on the scale and pick the winners and losers, which is not how even, it's not supposed to work with the public markets either. And I mean, I think we're going to see I think all of us want that not to happen. But it certainly feels like that is the recipe for corruption and disaster and not how any of this is supposed to go.
Well, Teddy, this is not anything new, though. I mean, we've seen an administration with Donald Trump at the helm. I mean, if there was emoluments clause violations every other week, that's exactly what was going on. And any existing guardrails we saw before are clearly been eradicated, especially when you stack with loyalists. And so, Teddy, what's the landscape looking then? Is it just going to be 4 years of Trump's billionaire buddies feeding at the trough?
Look, I think I don't know is the answer. We don't exactly know how long the marriage between kind of Musk and Trump will last. We don't really know what Elon's kind of policy wish list looks like. I mean, right now during the transition, Musk is almost manic about the need for government reform. He was in D.C. yesterday, kind of working on his government efficiency panel. And, he believes that he can cut $2 trillion from the federal budget, which obviously is difficult. But, look, he has the energy of a rookie here, right? And that's good and bad, right? I mean, there is ambition, that's for sure. He has lots of bright people from the tech industry who want to get involved. And when you talk with kind of Musk allies, they love to pepper in references to, the best and the brightest and the team of rivals and, choose your presidential historical reference here. But the downside of being a rookie is, and maybe I'm not trying to be overly cynical here, but politics is hard, right? Policy is hard. And just because you have created a lot of value in the startup world or in manufacturing or in electric vehicles does not mean that it is easy to, help find trillions of dollars in federal savings. And what exactly Musk is going to be pushing for and what these other wealth people are going to be pushing for might be pretty idiosyncratic. It's not just going to be, Miriam Adelson wanting the embassy moved from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv, as she did during her term, during Trump's first term. That was pretty clear and evident. What this new group of tech billionaires want, we don't exactly know yet. And that's partially because that are so new. This is their first time being so close to the throne.
Okay, I don't think JV people should have their first at bat with our American government, our democracy. And I also think, Teddy, they're going to want to have more zeros added. But I also would say Elon Musk, he's shown what he can do with Twitter/X and exactly the value of that and what it is now. Molly, listen to Elon Musk talk about cutting waste. Teddy mentioned that, how much they want to cut. Cutting waste in the government, but how it would actually lead to hardship. Take a listen.
We have to reduce spending to live within our means. That necessarily involves some temporary hardship, but it will ensure long-term prosperity.
Molly, the collective wealth of this Trump cabinet is at least, and that's I'm going to underscore, at least $10 billion. I really don't think anybody that's not a part of that billionaire class is sitting there understanding that these people understand what hardship means in order to ensure long-term prosperity.
Yeah, it's just wild. And the other thing I think it's important to realize is this is all so that they can protect the Trump tax cuts, right? Because the Trump tax cuts will expire in 2025. So this is not even like the idea that this has to happen, that they have to cut these things. No, they can just, the tax cuts can expire. We can raise taxes on the wealthiest people, which is what the Harris world wanted to do before. We can raise corporate taxes. I mean, just the whole idea that the only way to do this is to cut Social Security and Medicare and food stamps for poor kids. I mean, this is just completely a made up problem. And when you look at their plan, they will only cut spending. They will not raise taxes. I mean, look, if you're going to do it that way, then, okay. But the idea that a bunch of billionaires are going to raise taxes or cut, or they're not going to raise taxes, actually, they're going to cut these programs, these social programs, so that they can have lower taxes. I mean, I don't know how they sell this to the American people.
NBC's Vaughn Hilliard and Kelly Cobiella are both reporting from Paris. Also with us, Michael Crowley, the New York Times diplomatic correspondent. So, Vaughn, first can you tell us about Trump's visit? His long and sometimes rocky relationship with Macron, primarily over NATO and Ukraine.
Right. Much like the comeback cathedral here behind us, this is a comeback president, and this is a comeback relationship for Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump. If you go back to at the time that this cathedral burned in 2019, it was about the same time that Donald Trump was threatening to impose tariffs on French wines imported to the United States in retaliation for what he said was unfair digital sales tax that French President Emmanuel Macron was putting on. And so this for Donald Trump is going to be his first international trip since winning last November's election. And for him, is it a testament about the longstanding relationship that these two men have at a perilous time, let's be very frank, for the French president? His government collapsing just this week, the prime minister resigning just over 24 hours ago, and at a point in time in which he has expressed openly concerns about an additional trade war and about even further tariffs that Donald Trump has threatened to impose on all EU goods imported into the United States, but also serious question marks about the United States' commitment under the Trump administration to continuing to provide funding and aid to Ukraine in its defense against Russia's aggression at a time that the NATO alliance is questioning the extent to which Donald Trump will remain committed to the cause of that France has been on the front lines of maintaining a strong relationship with President Zelensky. So there's a lot of questions tomorrow. We should note President Biden was invited to attend. He declined. Jill Biden, the First Lady, will be here in attendance, but Donald Trump will be alongside the likes of the President of Italy, the Kings of Jordan and Morocco. Prince William will be here as well. And we are told that additional dignitaries and other foreign leaders are expected to attend this ceremony. Donald Trump will be flying in from New York tomorrow for the ceremony that will be here tomorrow evening before making his way inside of the actual cathedral upon its openings with the bells welcoming folks back into the cathedral for the first time in 5 years, Andrea.
And Kelly, in 2019, Macron vowed he would reopen Notre Dame by the end of this year. He did it. It's really a remarkable accomplishment. You've been covering it. This could be a victory lap, but certainly doesn't seem that way with his government collapsing. His own term doesn't end until 2027, but his power is completely gridlocked with what's going on in the National Assembly.
Yeah, he should be able to celebrate this moment. He'll try to put a good face on it with all of the ceremonies, the pomp and religious pageantry tomorrow. But the bottom line is it's been a very difficult week for President Macron here in France. His parliament is deadlocked. They can't pass a budget. In fact, the reason the prime minister was brought down was because he was trying to force through a spending plan for the government using constitutional powers and not taking it to the vote because he simply couldn't get enough votes behind him. President Macron took a gamble earlier this year by calling early parliamentary elections, and he lost that gamble. That he now has a deadlocked parliament and is struggling to get anything done. And really, the people, as well as some parties, turning against him. Now, tomorrow there's meant to be a very grand ceremony starting at 7 o'clock. A big film will be played celebrating the people who made this incredible feat happen, helped to rebuild Notre Dame. President Macron will make a speech. He will be presiding over these celebrations along with the Archbishop of Paris, who will then grandly knock 3 times on the doors of Notre Dame with the choir of Notre Dame singing back at him before the doors fling open, the guests enter, and the world once again gets to see what an incredible feat has been accomplished here. But no doubt, while people here in France are very proud of what has happened here at Notre Dame, for the most part, many are not at all happy with President Macron or with the government.
Yeah, you know, it's just so extraordinary that this has been accomplished. But, Michael, during Trump's first term, Macron, as the Associated Press put it, proved to be among the world leaders most adept at managing the American president's whims, trying to develop a personal relationship. We see the pictures there. That was a Bastille Day ceremony. And you'll remember that President Trump, in his first White House term, was so impressed with the parade, the military parade, that he came back and wanted an inaugural parade like that on Pennsylvania Avenue and was told that he couldn't have tanks because they would collapse the asphalt.
That's right, Andrea. An unforgettable moment from Trump's first term. Look, I think that Macron learned early something that a lot of world leaders are going to be practicing, which is the old adage that flattery will get you everywhere. You know, Macron is one of many world leaders who have deep disagreements with President Trump. You know, I have little doubt that privately he would have liked to see Kamala Harris win the election. I mean, I haven't been told that directly, but I think, you know, it's pretty safe to infer it. But like a lot of European leaders who don't welcome Trump's return, I think they feel like they have no choice but to flatter him, embrace him, treat him essentially like royalty, because Trump responds to that. He's very ego-driven, and we're starting to see this happen around the world. You know, I'm thinking of the South Korean president who has been in the news because of that sort of inept declaration of martial law. But before that little fiasco, the presidential office in Seoul let it be known that the South Korean president was working on his golf game, dusting off his golf clubs. He hadn't played in years, but he was getting ready to go hit the links with Trump. So all around the world, these leaders are getting ready to stroke Trump's ego. And for Macron, you know, he's very smart about this. This is a great stagecraft, Trump-style stagecraft. Notre Dame, of course, is a, you know, giant, iconic landmark known around the world. It's large in scale. It's a huge, the fire was a huge deal. The reopening will be a huge deal. It's the kind of event and setting that Trump is absolutely going to love. So I think it's a smart move by Macron, even if he's going to be kind of biting his tongue about his true feelings.
And, Michael, I just want to also ask you about opposition mounting to Tulsi Gabbard taking over the intelligence community. You've got this extraordinary letter from so many former generals, diplomats, you know, high-ranking generals and admirals, as well as ambassadors from all over the world, arguing that she's inexperienced, but in particular concerned about her secret visits to Bashar al-Assad, the dictator in Syria, who's right now, of course, beleaguered, as well as her public pronouncements echoing Vladimir Putin's propaganda, frankly, about Ukraine.
Absolutely, Andrew. I mean, she is, if she were confirmed, she would be the head of the entire intelligence community. That job is not as famous as the CIA director, but the CIA director actually reports to the director of national intelligence. She would be sitting atop the pyramid of all of America's intelligence agencies. And, I think the biggest concern probably involves Russia and her access to American intelligence, a lot of which, one of our highest intelligence targets right now, intelligence competitions, has to do with the competition for influence with Moscow. And I think that's a source of enormous concern. But the fact that Syria is back in the headlines, I think, lends a new urgency to this. And frankly, Andrea, I think is bad for her nomination because it really reminds people and makes vivid again the fact that she was, essentially taking the side of Bashar Assad in this civil war. Now, let's be clear, and I'll wrap up. It's a very complicated situation, and the rebel forces have some real bad guys among them, so it's not black and white. But to go and meet with Assad, and particularly to endorse his claim that the rebel forces had essentially used chemical weapons on themselves and that Assad had not used them, despite the findings of the United Nations, United States, a lot of other independent sources, that's just very hard for people to figure out. And so, again, I think the fact that Syria is back in the headlines is going to make this even more of an uphill fight for her.
We begin tonight with the trouble with Donald Trump's national security picks. Among his many controversial and unqualified selections thus far, Tulsi Gabbard, his choice for Director of National Intelligence, looms as perhaps the most concerning of all. That's the message from nearly 100 former national security officials who say they are alarmed at the prospect of Gabbard leading the nation's intelligence community, overseeing all 17 intelligence agencies, including the CIA, and briefing the president daily on intelligence matters. In a letter obtained by NBC News, the officials noted several of Ms. Gabbard's past actions call into question her ability to deliver unbiased intelligence briefings to the president, Congress, and to the entire national security apparatus. Senate committees should consider in closed sessions all information available to the U.S. government when considering Ms. Gabbard's qualifications to manage our country's intelligence agencies. The officials said the Senate must carefully evaluate whether Gabbard is equipped for the job, given that she'd be the least experienced person to hold that position since it was created in 2004. The letter singles out one of Gabbard's most questionable acts. As a congresswoman, she made a secret trip to Syria and met with its authoritarian dictator, Bashar al-Assad, after which she said she was skeptical of U.S. intelligence findings that Assad's regime was behind a chemical weapons attack that killed dozens of people. Gabbard continued to defend her visit with Assad as a candidate for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination, including when she said this in 2019.
Do you think Assad is our enemy?
Assad is not the enemy of the United States because Syria does not pose a direct threat to the United States.
What is Assad to the U.S.? What is the word?
You can describe it however you want to describe it.
I want to know how you describe it.
My point is that whether it is Syria or any of these other countries, we need to look at how their interests are counter to or aligned with ours.
The officials also cited Gabbard's penchant for parroting Russian propaganda and disinformation and her history as an apologist for Russian President Vladimir Putin. She posted this just 3 days after Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022.
Presidents Putin, Zelensky, and Biden, it's time to put geopolitics aside and embrace the spirit of aloha, respect, and love for the Ukrainian people by coming to an agreement that Ukraine will be a neutral country.
This week, 3 former aides to Gabbard told ABC News that Gabbard's views on Russia have been shaped by consumption of Russian state media, saying that she regularly read and shared articles from Russian news site RT. Of course, Tulsi Gabbard isn't the only one of Trump's picks coming under fresh scrutiny. Pete Hegseth, his pick for defense secretary, faces an uphill battle with even some Republican senators. In the meantime, Hegseth's lawyer says his name has been submitted to the FBI for a background check. And after days of mixed messages over whether he'd potentially switch horses and back Florida Governor Ron DeSantis as defense secretary instead, today, Donald Trump publicly backed the former Fox Weekend host, posting on his social media that Hegseth's support is strong and deep, much more so than the fake news would have you believe, unquote. Pete Hegseth said tonight that he spoke again today with Iowa Republican Senator Joni Ernst, a key vote. And in his first network television interview as president-elect, Trump spoke with NBC's Kristen Welker about Hegseth's prospects.
It looks like Pete is doing well now. I mean, people were a little bit concerned. He's a young guy with a tremendous track record, actually. He went to Princeton and went to Harvard. He was a good student at both, but he loves the military, and I think people are starting to see it. So we'll be working on his nomination along with a lot of others.
Since you bring him up, do you still have confidence in Pete Hegseth?
Yes, I do. I really do. He's a very smart guy. I've known him through Fox, but I've known him for a long time. And he's basically a military guy. I mean, every time I talk to him, all he wants to talk about is the military. He's a military guy.
Have you gotten assurances from senators that he's going to be confirmed? Do you think he can make it?
No. I think he will, yeah. I've had a lot of senators call me up saying he's fantastic.
You don't drink yourself.
No.
You've talked about how devastating drinking can be.
Yeah.
How concerned are you that the person who you picked for this top job at the Defense Department, at least according to those who've worked with him, has struggled with drinking?
But I've spoken to people that know him very well, and they say he does not have a drinking problem.
Joining me now is Angelo Carasone, president and CEO of Media Matters, and Charlie Sykes, MSNBC contributor and columnist. I want to start with you, Angelo, first. I've known him through Fox. That is the way Donald Trump seems to decide who he wants around him, whether they're either a billionaire or he pardoned them in the past or has some other relationship personally with them that way. But in this case, it's someone he saw on TV. He likes the way he looks. He likes the way he talks about America. That's not the way we normally choose people for an important job like Department of Defense. But what do you make of that? And I'm sure Media Matters has a rich history of some of the things that Pete Hegseth has said and some of the things that Tulsi Gabbard has said. And when you go through your own archives on these two people, what do you make of it?
I mean, what I would just note at the top is that there's a revolving door between Fox and sort of the upcoming Trump administration and the past Trump administration. I mean, that is one of the criteria for likelihood of getting a job. And you sort of said something in your intro there that sort of hit the nail on the head, which is that he does think of this as theater, as central casting. And that's sort of disturbing, given all that we know about sort of rising authoritarianism and sort of that bent, because the reality is that authoritarianism is theater. And so part of what Hegseth's role is designed to do is to sort of play a part. He sort of sees him as somebody that is going to be out there representing the ideal of masculinity in the military and sort of a radical shift in how we think about that role and its orientation in our own public life and our daily lives. In terms of what they said that's disturbing, I mean, Hegseth is especially concerning because he's a Christian nationalist. Obviously his misogyny is prevalent, his policies and his perspectives there, but he's somebody that's, a Christian nationalist, and he really believes that that Islam needs to be eradicated from the world. He sort of sees the military as not just a part of American foreign policy, but sort of as a flaming sword for Jesus. And that is going to poison the kinds of input and advice that he gives to Trump. It's certainly going to color his approach. And Gabbard, on the other hand, she is, as you noticed, she's a Fox figure too. I mean, she was on air 122 times in the last year and a half. She guest hosted all the times, and her closest person at Fox was Tucker Carlson. And that probably illustrates where some of that extra sympathy for Russia comes from. She's not a credible messenger. She's pushed a long history of not just radical ideas, but she's a creature of the conspiratorial sort of right-wing fever swamps. And that is something now that in this new capacity, if she gets into this role, is she's going to be able to pluck things from the fringes and put them directly in front of Trump in a way that it used to have to filter its way through a couple tweets and right-wing radio shows. Now it'll just go directly from InfoWars to Donald Trump.
Yeah, and Charlie, I think Angelo has really sort of concisely put together what one of the challenges here is, right? Donald Trump's depth on issues is not very deep. It's Fox deep. It's what he sees on Fox, what looks good to him, what sounds good to him. And for a lot of his base, the information that they take in comes from social media, from places like InfoWars, as does Tulsi Gabbard, right? And, Pete Hegseth's ideas are more shaped in his social world, that the world of where he's thinking about kind of the ideas of the way he wants society to be. But these are managerial jobs, right? The job of defense secretary is a management job. It's managing 3 million people. It's managing a giant organization. It's managing a giant organization that's a big budget. He doesn't have any experiences doing that. And I want you to talk about that. And also specifically Tulsi Gabbard. She's going to come in there, and whatever RT has fed her in her life, she can then feed that to Donald Trump, who's already sort of subject to conspiracy theories. Here's Tulsi Gabbard talking about Russia. This is Tulsi Gabbard in her own words.
Putin has made very clear all along that their security, in his mind, is what's at stake here. And they do not want to see
I don't want to interrupt you,
U.S.
but
and NATO
Putin
troops
also said Ukraine is not a country.
It's not strategically possible to think that Ukraine is going to beat Russia. You hear President Biden say, well, this is Putin's war. This is Putin's fault. It's Putin who's the one who's solely responsible. Well, the United States and some of these European NATO countries are fueling this war.
Charlie, this is her tweet in 2015 showing support for Putin. Al-Qaeda attacked us on 9/11 and must be defeated. Obama won't bomb them in Syria. Putin did. Never forget 9/11. I will note that the agency she's being tapped to head was created in 2004 as a result, right, to try to prevent another 9/11.
Right.
Your thoughts?
Okay, so, I mean, this goes right to the heart of it. It is not simply that they are unqualified or that they have personal quirks like drinking. These two nominees pose a real present danger to national security. They are dangerous to the security of the United States of America. Now, this is crucial because, of course, Donald Trump wants to portray himself as the advocate of the military and of a strong United States. But with Tulsi Gabbard, you have somebody who has been parroting the propaganda of some of the world's worst thuggish authoritarians, including Vladimir Putin. The fact is that she has been mainlining Russian propaganda, which will now, I think reasonably you can assume, will be part of the way that she tries to influence the president of the United States. Pete Hegseth, you know, the drinking is bad, and you know, an Earth 2.0 would alone be disqualifying, as well as the allegations about his treatment of women. But as Angelo just mentioned, he is also an extremist. He is a Trump loyalist who has, I would say, bizarre ideas about the role of the military, the role of the United States. And this is something that I think the Senate needs to focus on and the American people need to focus on. Do these two nominees make the United States stronger and safer, or do they bring into the very heart of the federal government real dangers? And with Tulsi Gabbard, where actually, does the information come from? What are her instincts?
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Donald Trump is planning to stock his White House with more than a dozen billionaires and super rich people. As Axios puts it, the president-elect has assembled an administration of unprecedented, mind-boggling wealth. Now, let's be clear here, right? The U.S. is a place where moneyed interests have had incredible leverage and influence for a very long time. In fact, it's been a huge gaping wound in American democracy. But this is different and worse, I think, the worst it's ever been. I mean, Trump has brought in huge amounts of money from a very small amount of people, unprecedented in modern times, including the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, who spent $250 million helping to elect Trump. And those rich benefactors have all sorts of private interests. And it's not crazy to imagine they are expecting something in return. For Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, it is the opportunity to slash government spending, including this country's social safety net. Except, presumably, the billions of dollars in federal contracts that Musk's companies get. Now, when people talk about oligarchy in this country, ruled by the wealthiest people, they're often using it in a kind of metaphorical sense. Very rich folks and corporations have a lot more political influence than the rest of us. They manage the agenda on Capitol Hill. But oligarchy under Donald Trump is starting to look much more literal. The billionaires are being given direct access to the levers of state power. Do you think they're going to use that authority to benefit the American public, or are they going to use it to benefit themselves? To that end, Donald Trump just announced he will be appointing venture capitalist and former PayPal exec David Sacks to his White House. You may not be familiar with Sacks. He's very rich, a right-wing South African-born guy who's quite close with the other two very rich right-wing South African guys, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. In fact, back in the 90s, Sachs actually co-wrote a book with Thiel about how diversity is bad, titled The Diversity Myth. And Sachs has been a vocal supporter of Donald Trump, hosting a fundraiser for him at his San Francisco mansion last spring, where some folks paid $300,000 per person. Sachs is now going to be Donald Trump's czar for crypto and AI. Since Trump's election, cryptocurrency holdings have gone through the roof, with the anticipation they will face a far more friendly regulatory environment under Trump. In fact, just yesterday, the value of Bitcoin, a single one, hit $100,000 for the first time. Crypto interests were one of the biggest spenders in this election cycle. They dropped a ton of money for Trump and against crypto-skeptical Democrats, including in primaries, or in this Senate election in Ohio, where they dropped $40 million to oust the crypto-skeptic Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. And to be clear, I think crypto is interesting. I know a lot of people who own crypto, but there are also perfectly good reasons to be skeptical of cryptocurrency, particularly as a financial instrument integrated into the American financial system. Not the least of being, it's absolutely rife with scams, fraud, grift, and disasters, blow-ups. Just this week, retail investors, regular people, got absolutely wiped out after investing in a failed cryptocurrency from a viral TikTok star. So for very understandable reasons, Democrats and Democratic regulators have worked hard to keep crypto, which has been supremely volatile, blocked off from the rest of financial systems, so that if it crashes, it doesn't bring the entire U.S. economy down with it, requiring a bailout. Some rich people holding a lot of crypto disagree with that strategy. They want a bailout, implicit or explicit, if the house of cards comes crashing down. To that end, after Republicans took back the Senate with the help of money from the crypto industry, they now have a plan to return the favor. And I want you to listen to this part because no one's really talking about this, but the elements of the plot are just there in plain sight. Senate Republicans are working on a bill that would transfer billions and billions of dollars of money from the U.S. government, from taxpayers, and hand it over to a handful of big crypto holders.
We got a president for President Donald Trump. Here it is. This is the Bitcoin Reserve Bill in the Senate of the United States to establish a Bitcoin Strategic Reserve, a network of secure storage vaults, purchase program, and other programs to ensure the transparent management of Bitcoin holdings of the federal government.
Yes, the Bitcoin Act from Republican Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, it would establish a Federal Reserve of Bitcoin. It's truly one of the most audacious schemes I've ever seen in Congress. Here's why. Rich folks who own a lot of crypto have a problem, right? Cryptocurrency, Bitcoin in particular, is a very valuable asset. Single Bitcoin worth over 100 grand. Some very, very wealthy people own hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. David Sachs, for instance, has a lot of crypto. That said, it's not a liquid asset like cash that you can easily spend or invest or use for practical purposes. It has no practical use really outside of a few gimmicks, and it's very useful for criminal cartels. So if you're an investor, you're sitting on this speculative asset. You can't actually do anything with it, but it's worth a lot of money. What's more, if you try to sell it all off, right, to get rid of it, the hordes of Bitcoin on the exchanges, that's going to flood the market and tank the price. So what's the solution? They're going to sell it to the U.S. government.
Over 5 years, the United States will assemble 1 million Bitcoin, 5% of the world's supply. And it will be held for a minimum of 20 years and can be used for one purpose: reduce our debt.
Reduce our debt? You can't pay the debt down in Bitcoin. Are you tracking this? Are you tracking what's being planned and announced in person here, right? The U.S. government handing billions of dollars into the pockets of rich crypto holders? The plan is that the Bitcoin Act would have the government sell off some of its gold reserves, you know, the stuff from Fort Knox, and use the money to buy 1 billion Bitcoin. At current market value, that would cost $100 billion. Now, the actual price would likely be much higher because that market value would almost certainly rise as a result when a new buyer enters the market and boost the price of the asset the buyer is now legally obligated to buy. This is an enormous heist. They're just backing the truck up to the government in front of all of us. A massive bailout to the crypto world. The opportunity to turn a speculative asset into real cash on your dime. And presumably David Sachs, as the crypto czar, will help usher that plan through. And there is a real irony here. For a long time, as long as I've been covering crypto, which is over a decade, advocates have sold crypto as this libertarian project, right? We don't need government. We don't need banks. We don't need financial intermediaries. We don't need regulation. Here's Sachs himself making that point on a podcast 2 years ago.
There is a huge risk of currency debasement when the government is in control, and particularly when you have the world's reserve currency. There's just such an enormous temptation to print money to finance your budget and to rack up loans that become unpayable. What Bitcoin offers is a different kind of currency where it's not backed by a government, it's backed by math, it's backed by encryption. And so you don't have to trust the government.
All of that lofty rhetoric goes right out the window, though, when Republicans decide they want the government to initiate a massive upward transfer of wealth and bail out the crypto industry.
New concerns being raised about another of Donald Trump's choices now. A group of nearly 100 former national security officials sounding the alarm over President-elect Trump's decision to tap former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence. In a letter addressed to Senate leadership, the officials write they are alarmed to hear of Gabbard's nomination because of her history of, quote, sympathy for dictators like Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad of Syria. The national security officials also note Gabbard would be the least experienced Director of National Intelligence since the position was created in 2004. The group urges the Senate to carefully evaluate Gabbard through closed-door hearings that would give lawmakers the opportunity to review government files on the DNI pick. So we seem to be going here, Caddy K, down the line. It started with Matt Gaetz. He got his moment of attention, and he had to step back. For now, it's Pete Hegseth at defense. But many, many, not just these 100 former and current national security officials, but many, many people who've worked in intelligence, who've worked in national security, have expressed their objections, to put it mildly, to Tulsi Gabbard, given her past sympathies for Putin, for Assad and other dictators, that she would be holding all of America's secrets.
Yeah, the conservative kind of defense of Tulsi Gabbard seems to be that the intelligence community needs a shakeup. Just look at the Iraq war, where their intelligence was faulty or managed to push a political situation that got America into that disastrous war. And so some conservatives that I've spoken to have said, well, she is somebody that believes that. She's very skeptical about the intelligence community, and it's time that they got a real kind of hauling over. But more predominantly, even from Republicans, the view that I'm hearing is the problem with Tulsi Gabbard is not just that she doesn't have the experience, she's not qualified in the way that Pete Hegseth has never run a department like this, Bobby Kennedy has never run a department the size of the department that he would be looking at. It's also that she's not known famously for keeping secrets. I mean, I've had a former CIA person say to me that one of the things she's famous for is that she doesn't keep secrets terribly well. And the concern is, what would the knock-on effect be with allies because of that? Signal intelligence, I understand, is very tied up between America and its allies. But human intelligence is something that can be sort of decoupled, if you like. And one of the concerns that I've heard is that if Tulsi Gabbard is the person who's at the head of America's intelligence community, then that could happen, that something human intelligence could just not come through to America in the way that it has done.
So, Gene, we know the point of many of these picks is to be anti-establishment, anti-elite, anti-deep state, to use a term favored by Donald Trump and his supporters. But there are people who are not establishment, who are not elite, who don't also sympathize with Vladimir Putin and Bashar al-Assad.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And look, I could certainly make the argument that, yes, the intelligence community could use some scrutiny and maybe some shaking up. And they have been wrong about a number of things, important things over the years. And so, why is that? But there is absolutely no indication that Tulsi Gabbard is capable of making that sort of transition, to say nothing of the other questions about her and, frankly, about her loyalties, about the way she has publicly been more supportive of Putin and of Assad than others or than almost anybody else in her position. It's these nominees simply are not qualified to do the jobs that they're being nominated to do, and that has to be, if not the number one consideration, I think, for these senators. It's certainly up there. You talk about the allegations about Pete Hegseth, but what makes you think he can run a bureaucracy and fighting machine as big as the Defense Department? There's nothing in his past that makes me think he's capable of doing that. And to compare, to say, well, Joni Ernst voted for Lloyd Austin, so she's got to vote for him. Well, Lloyd Austin was, a veteran leader in the armed forces who did have the experience, who knew the Pentagon, who knew how to get things done, who Hegseth is not that, and again, Tulsi Gabbard is not bad in terms of intelligence. So, are the senators really going to approve people who are not qualified and probably not capable of serving the country the way it needs to be served in these very, very big jobs? And I think that's the main question.
It's a great point. In a lot of the cases of some of these choices, the questions over character have overshadowed all the questions about qualifications for the actual job. So, Jackie Alemany, there's new reporting from the Bulwark this morning that says Donald Trump is going to go to the mat for both Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. because he believes they represent everything he represents, a challenge to the status quo, taking down the bureaucracy, shaking up Washington. With all the focus right now on Pete Hegseth, what's your sense of the appetite in Congress for a Tulsi Gabbard, for a Bobby Kennedy?
So this has been the one benefit of having other candidates that are more overtly controversial. It's been a little bit of a deflection tactic from some of the other candidates and nominees who also have controversies that haven't yet spilled out into public view yet. But what you're saying exactly is why Trump aides are telling us behind the scenes that backing Hegseth and continuing to stand behind him is so important to show and to not allow this narrative to set in that the GOP-led Senate has essentially neutered Trump's power and his mandate here to appoint people into his positions, people who are loyalists, who are actually going to carry out his campaign promises and his MAGA mandate. So far, there hasn't been much talk of Gabbard. People have been pretty preoccupied on Capitol Hill, but this is exactly where FBI checks continue to come into the conversation. There is a desire for the full spectrum of information possible. And I think that this is where they're going to get a lot of that on Gabbard in particular. But, it'll be interesting to see what kind of position and posture Trump takes with people like RFK and Gabbard. So far, with Matt Gaetz and even with Pete Hegseth, Trump has sat back a little bit and let them try to front a defense. He did make some calls for Matt Gaetz prior to Gaetz withdrawing from the nomination, but we have been told that he hasn't been making calls on behalf of Hegseth and has largely left it up to him and his team to fend for himself and put up as robust of a defense as possible. But, we will see as this process plays out. We know that the transition team has now that these people have been picked and put into place are focusing on murder boards and prep and combating some of these narratives in the media.
It's still early in the process. It's worth reminding people we still have FBI background checks and, of course, the hearings themselves, assuming some of these choices make it all the way to the hearings. Still ahead.